Oh man, look at that. There is something about that sense of wonder that just washes over you when you walk into a church or a cathedral that old and ancient. And like, the tiles on the roof, what's stopping us from making more roofs like that? That's like, the easier we have it to build stuff with technology, the lazier we've gotten. I am back in Vienna right now for the first time in 12 years. That's such a long time, even though this is one of my favorite cities in Europe. I think it's been long enough where every detail of my life is totally different from how it was when I was last here. But this city looks exactly the same. It's the timeless one. Not only is it a personal favorite, it was recently named the world's most livable city. What makes it so livable? I'm here to find out. So Vienna was named the most livable city in the world. And not just once. It won this distinction back in 2018, 2019, and in 2022, it's back on top. So Vienna's first place ranking comes from the Economist Intelligence Unit's Global Livability Index. That's a mouthful. Here's their criteria for what makes a city livable. Stability, healthcare, culture and environment, education, and infrastructure. Let's figure out what makes Vienna so livable. That's how easy I can make it from one side of town to the other for a coffee or a sandwich. And the public transit in Vienna makes that really easy. First of all, the city is well covered by train stops. There are over 5,300 stations around the city and surrounding area, which means roughly one for every 4,500 Viennese residents. Compare that to one for every 17,700 New Yorkers, one for every 33,000 Londoners, or one for every 50,000 people in Tokyo. The underground U-Bahn, the suburban S-Bahn, and the tram work in sync, connecting central stations to suburbs and other important spots like the airport. The trains run pretty well. They go from 5 a.m. to midnight, and on weekends they go 24 hours, making it really unlikely you'll be in the unfortunate position of having to walk home at night. In the event you do have to walk, or maybe just want to walk, Vienna is really pedestrian friendly. There's calm streets, they're often tree-lined, and there's plenty of sidewalk cafes and embellishments on every building to make it an aesthetic experience. Oh, but I didn't even mention my favorite part of Vienna's train system, and it's that it costs €1 a day. For my monthly payment on my car and maybe 1 month's worth of gas, that's pretty much all I need to get around the town for a whole year. To me, the convenience factor speaks for itself, but if for some reason there's still a place you want to get to by car, because so many people take the public transit, the streets are way less congested. Sometimes we always talk about the environmental benefits of driving less, which are all true, but we often underrate all the things we have to gain from making that shift as well. I do not like sitting in a car all day. I realized that very quickly, especially when I started to work from home and no longer needed to. 10 years ago, I lived in Argentina, and while nobody really raves about their public transport, it was functional enough, and I loved having the ability to unwind, people watch, and listen to audiobooks on my way home. There's something very suffocating about just going from your house to the office to the gym or wherever, just enclosed in the shell of your car. It cuts you off from other people, it cuts you off from your surroundings. On the other hand, if you have a lot of great places to walk like this, it greatly increases the sense of community. If you take the same walk every day, the people on that walk become familiar faces, and there's that much greater likelihood of bumping into someone you know and something spontaneous happening. That doesn't really happen back at home outside of like when I was in college and we had an arrangement where we were all living in the same space. No wonder so many people think that's the happiest year of their lives. This does remind me of something I've heard Bogota's mayor say. A developed place is not where the poor have cars, it's where the wealthy use public transport. These days, whenever I'm in a new city, I just think to myself, I wonder how child-friendly this place is gonna be. Since when I do travel with my family, it's with a band of 3 kids. I have to admit, one of my biggest frustrations with the US now is that we're not child-friendly. Like, if anything, I often feel like we're child-hostile. Between baby formula shortages and school shootings, it feels like whatever a society that really valued children would do, we keep doing the opposite. This is kind of the rare trip right now that I get to take by myself, but it's still like second nature. You wonder what's it gonna be like to be here with those guys? The reality is most cities are not built for children. Our cities really began to grow and expand during the industrial era, where these cities were being designed by men for people like themselves. They rarely thought about how moms or children or the elderly would need to get around. It just wasn't on their minds. There's this big irony of older people often complaining about why are kids always on their screens, why don't they go play outside? It's because the outside we all designed for them looks like this. This is not Stranger Things.
Yeah, Lucas!
Check this out. This is a map of Sheffield, England, with the real activities and locations of 4 generations of a family imposed on top. In 1919, a boy could wander off to a fish lake 6 miles from his house. In 1950, his son could only roam within a 1-mile radius. This guy raised his daughter in the north, and in 1979, she could walk about half a mile to the swimming pool. And in 2007, her son, the first guy's great-grandchild, could only walk as far as the end of their street, 300 yards. Now there's more to how child-friendly a city is than whether it has playgrounds or safe streets. Things like a social safety net or support for parents, those play a big role. Parental leave is a whole thing. First, there's Mutterschutz, mom protection. This leave starts 8 weeks before your due date and goes for 8 to 12 weeks after birth. Full salary, job protection, and then you enter Karens, parental leave that starts right once Mutterschutz ends. You get paid from your health insurance at the rate that you get paid varies by how long you take off. What's amazing is you can trade off who gets this between parents, and dads are generally pretty good at availing of this and doing their share. As of 3 years ago, dads also got guaranteed paternity leave, Vaterfrukarens, aka Daddy Month. If you've been at your job for 3 years, then you get Elternteilzeit, the right to work part-time. Childcare for kids pre-K is practically free. You'd pay about $70 a month for food, and it's amazing how they get every kid into a daycare close to where they live. To me, one of the things that seems to go hand in hand with being a great spot for kids is there lots of access to green space? How integrated is nature into the way a city is designed? I used to have this much more binary view of cities and urban life and nature. Like, I would always feel like it wasn't really nature unless you were just in miles and miles of undeveloped territory, like a national park or something. I guess I was always frustrated that, to me, even the municipal parks where I grew up just felt so overplanned and curated and manicured, and I wanted, like, what to me felt like real wildness. These days, things have kind of shifted for me a little bit. I'm much more of the mindset that, hey, like, this whole urban nature divide thing is just a myth. It's just a mentality. We're part of nature, right? And so even our built spaces are just sort of an extension. At the very least, I tend to think if we thought of our cities as expressions of nature, extensions of nature, rather than as exceptions, we might just treat it better. We might treat all of it better, including ourselves. These parks here are really nice. I'm in Thurkenschansplatz, which is massive. There's ponds, there's a restaurant, there's waterfalls, plenty of rocks, as you can see. I just keep thinking I would love to have my kids here. I could just imagine them having free run of this whole place. It's amazing. So check out what I found back behind me. It's a Filipino restaurant. Wherever you go in the world, you can find some Filipinos. So one of the things the EIU considers is culture, and one of the things on my list is culture and diversity. Basically, people don't want to live in a milquetoast place. We want places with diversity, places that mix it up, places that tell stories. I especially appreciate cultural diversity and a diversity of thought. You know, I think places are just better when you can interact and share moments with people of all kinds of backgrounds. So how diverse is Vienna? A little under half the people in Vienna are from countries outside of Austria. That sounds pretty diverse, though Austria is a small country geographically and European, so you have to wonder, does that just mean those people were born in Germany or Switzerland and moved over? I mean, that's still diversity, kind of, but you know what I mean. So the top country of origin other than Austria is Serbia, and I wouldn't have guessed that. This is followed by Turkey, Germany, and Poland. So mostly Europeans, followed by some from the Middle East, but even within there, there's still a different blend of histories and languages and all that. Also, Vienna has such a rich history that just blankets the town. I mean, you have cafes sitting in plain sight where folks like Leon Trotsky and Sigmund Freud would just sit and jot down their ideas. Okay, so Vienna's a great city for kids. You've got lots of access to green space, nature abounds, Austria's got a super strong social safety net. You can find a lot of these same things in some comparable cities like Helsinki, Amsterdam, Osaka, Toronto. What is it that gives Vienna that little extra edge? The one thing Vienna prioritizes above anything else is making sure people have a quality roof over their heads. For over a century, Vienna has invested heavily into its public housing system. So if you dropped into Vienna in the 1910s, it would not have been a great place to live. The city was growing fast, you had so many people and not enough places for them to live. You had this thing going on where people would split rooms and someone would sleep in the bed during the day and then swap out and another person would come and sleep at night. It was like dorm room, but like without the fun parts. As you might imagine, people got really tired of this, and this led to a really strong progressive movement growing out of the city. They passed pretty aggressive taxes so that they could build large housing complexes, and they built them in pretty much every neighborhood. This is really different compared to the US, where those seem to only be in place in the rough parts of town. This was a wild time. Vienna was really giving people who lived there a lot. These houses were pretty good, and they were really good considering how low people would pay for them. Most people would only pay 3.5% of their income. This was basically like a light maintenance fee. Vienna takes public housing really seriously. Other countries tend to treat public housing like a last resort, only really investing in it when housing is just too out of reach for too many people and homelessness is really visible. As a result, those houses look like last resorts. Vienna, on the other hand, treats its public housing projects like an opportunity. Will make places where people want to live and will keep their prices low. Since housing tends to be people's biggest expense, public housing keeps people's incomes more fluid. Small businesses and workplaces often prefer the public housing approach because it allows them to pay workers less since they don't have to keep up with such a surging cost of living. When they started building these complexes, they made a special effort to match the style of the other Viennese buildings surrounding them, which, if you've been to Vienna, those buildings are pretty resplendent. They wanted these spaces to be really functional, so they emphasized pedestrian and transit access, rather than having strict zoning laws like you have in the US separating residential and business activities. They aimed to integrate them. Oftentimes the lower level of public housing complexes were saved to rent out to businesses, cafes, restaurants, things like dentists and preschools. And look at the fronts of all these buildings. These are all public housing complexes, and they look good. I mean, compare this to what public housing looks like in the US, or to the commune of Noisy-le-Grand in France, which was so dystopian looking, they ended up using it as a backdrop in Hunger Games. Public housing in Vienna is so nice that about 2/3 of the city lives there. Because so many people adopt it, it's way less stigmatized compared to other countries. Going back to the whole diversity thing, it means that people from different backgrounds routinely become neighbors. These days, rent is capped at 20 to 25% of a person's income, but it's also really common to pay maybe around 15%. I know what you're thinking, all this has got to come at a cost, and you are right. Taxes are pretty high in Vienna. I would probably be paying about half of my income towards taxes. But I ran the numbers, and if you adjust my biggest expenses like housing and transportation and childcare, they're actually quite close. This is a really tough hypothetical to run through. Now let's just assume that at the end of the day the costs even out. What you really have to look for is, what do you get in exchange for what you pay? So how livable is Vienna? I think I've been here long enough to say very. Things like childcare, parental support, paternity leave, all that are things you really don't think about a place when you're just visiting as a tourist. So having the chance to really look into those and see how they work in Austria and in Vienna in particular have only further accented its status as, to me, an incredible place to live. You're better off if you build a city for people rather than cars. Also, if you try and make a city friendly for kids, odds are you'll make a city friendly for everyone. Making sure you integrate nature with your city is also a big plus. And if your city's got some personality, lean into it. People want to live in a city with soul.